Gwen, thank you so much for being on the show. I have followed your work for a while, and I'm so excited to learn more about the color, about the structure, and so much more. So thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks, Erica. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really honored to be part of the group. So,
Excellent. So for all of you listening, I followed Gwen's work for some time, and she just recently had a fabulous exhibition. It was a two-person exhibition with a good friend of ours and somebody who was at Chautauqua Institute, Susan Lichtman. And I think one of the first reasons I became drawn to your work was how you handle color and space. But before we dive into that, I would just really love to hear a little bit about your background and how you originally kind of got into painting.
okay, well, so I was born in New York City, and my parents moved when I was young to Indiana, and then they moved to Potomac, Maryland, and then outside of Philadelphia, and then I ended up back in Indianapolis for my high school years. And I had a happy childhood. I will say that I'm the oldest of three. And we just moved around a lot. I had to, I think academically, I wasn't a very good student, and that could be partly because, we were always kind of moving halfway through the year. But I was also naturally inclined to the arts. I felt, a kinship to, my art classes that I had, or music, film, writing. I was books, and I just felt, academically, I wasn't as interested. And so I think partly that's one reason that I was more into the arts. And I would say that my mother also was a big influence. She was always taking us to museums wherever we lived. And they would be art museums, but they would also be probably more like historical kinds of museums, especially when we lived outside of Washington, D.C. And but I think that the biggest part of an influence by my mother was that she was always observing things in life, like little things like caterpillars or the light of the time of day, and pointing things out. And I just remember her all through my childhood, noticing nuance, and I don't know if I became kind of that way because of that, or because I just inherited that from her, but she was a big influence.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. A little bit of both, right? Like pointing out the nuance, showing its importance, and maybe a natural inclination towards seeing those things and knowing that they matter. So you moved around a lot. Can you talk a bit about when you decided that you were going to study art at the next level?
So, so I was in high school and I was taking lots of art classes. But it wasn't, when I went to college, which was Indiana University, I didn't think that I was going to major in art, but I did decide to take a lot of art classes. And they have a great ballet department. So I was thinking about ballet, because I've been taking ballet, later in my childhood. And it was between those two departments. And I remember thinking, while I was in the art department, that I could keep on working into my 80s, 90s, that I would still be learning and able to work. Whereas, I almost felt like, in the ballet department, I was already, too old, in a way, that I could see the aging process there. And much as I loved dance, ballet, I still did it, but, I just moved over into the art department and, applied to the BFA program, got in, and just was surrounded by other great artists in that program, and also grad students. They had a good grad program then, and so it was just some of my teachers were grad students. And I go to their studio, and I think one thing I remember is their studios and our studios in the BFA program. They were in these old army barracks buildings, and in Bloomington, and I remember walking into, but before I became a BFA student, I was a first year student. I remember walking into the grad program because my teacher asked if I wanted to see her work. So I walked in there and I just was overwhelmed with the smell of oil paint and turpentine, which back then turpentine was very pure and pine-like. And I think that was just made a huge impact on me. I just was mesmerized by that fragrance, and I just fell right into it. And at that point I knew I just wanted to paint, but it was also to do with what I saw, around
Mhm.
studios, and feeling like I was learning all the time. I was learning, and it was always a struggle, but it was a good struggle.
Mm. I love that smell.
Yeah.
The smell of oil paint and terps of sorts. So yeah, IU has such a strong program and a great museum there. And it's funny, just as a side note, at Chautauqua now, the ballet company, the artistic director is faculty at Indiana University.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah,
Wow. I hope you
funny
guys.
little
Yeah.
overlap there. So you fall in love, essentially, it sounds like, you fall in love and you end up following this love to go get your MFA. So you were on the East Coast for that.
Mhm.
Can you take us back to that time of, maybe being in graduate school or coming out of it, and what you were working on and how you were kind of moving forward?
Yeah, so, this is the late 70s, early 80s when I finished, and, I actually went to Rhode Island College for 2 years because, I was with someone that got a job on the East Coast, so I moved with him, and I went to school there to finish my degree, and then back then we went right from undergrad to grad school, so everyone did that. I applied, and I got in to Yale and some other schools, but really wanted to go to Yale. Everyone, at Indiana University, I think all my teachers probably went there, and they were, always pitching that. Um, so, um, so I was a little bit nervous. I knew who was teaching there. I was a little bit nervous of William Bailey, because I was a still life painter, and he was a still life painter. And I just assumed that because of the paintings that he made, I had no idea about his ideas about painting or anything. I assumed that, maybe he would try to get me to paint like that. And so, it was a great surprise to find out that he was nothing like that. And he was very open, and he could speak about anyone's paintings, really intelligently. And he liked all kinds of artists. And then there were just so many great people that I studied with there. Jake Berteau and Bill Bailey were the main people, but also Andrew Forge. And those three, I think, were the main people, for me. I also studied with Gretna Campbell, and I was her TA my second year. What I also loved about that school, which I didn't know at the time, but you only TA for one semester. It's usually your second year. I mean, some people might have TA'd for a year, but it really protects you from, and keeps you in your studio. And there weren't very many academics to do, but they were really interesting, the ones that I did take. And yeah, so it was, and the students, of course, where you meet so many people, because there's 20 people the year ahead of you, and you're in a class of 20 and 20 behind you. So there's all these people that are making different paintings, and interested in painting. And yeah, it was a great experience.
Oh, I love that. Bill Bailey and Gretna Campbell. I love that you got to TA for Gretna Campbell. Do you have
Mm.
any short, fun stories from being her TA or?
Yeah, well, those classes, I remember they were huge. It was a drawing class, and it'd be like 30 people.
Oh, wow.
And I remember she would come into class with this kind of pile of notes, the spiral notebook, and she'd been writing in it the whole train ride up. And she just had an abundance of ideas and things, and they all came out of this writing, that she had done 2 hours before or whatever. I remember that about her, and she just got the students to get excited about drawing and seeing, and whether we were in the studio or we went out in the landscape when it got warmer. But I think there were just so many people in the class. It was just packed, and they weren't necessarily art majors. They came from all different backgrounds. But I liked her, and she was I liked her work. And she taught painting and drawing to undergrads, but she would visit grad studios as well. She was just a wonderful, kind of brave painter, and
Mhm.
and personality in that department, because they were all men teaching. She was the only woman at the time, so she was a role model for a lot of us. And just a wonderful figurative painter, perceptual painter.
Mhm. Oh, I love thinking of that, of being in her drawing class and her coming in with this spiral notebook that she's been writing in and the ideas and making people passionate about seeing, and responding to that. Uh, so now I'd love to come into the here and now. Can you tell us where you're located and also, what a day in the studio looks like for you?
Yeah, so I live in Connecticut, and it's pretty much northeast Connecticut. I live right next to the Rhode Island border, and a very rural area, an old mill town. And I have a studio on my property, and I wake up in the morning, I do some exercise, I have my coffee, my tea, maybe do some emails, and then I go to my studio by late morning, and I walk in. I don't have, there's not any kind of ritual. I don't start with anything in particular. I just look on the walls, and, I might pick up where I left off the day before, or just decide that, I need to start something new. Usually, if I'm going to start something new, I'm kind of thinking about that for a few days. But I normally walk in there, and I just start working on a problem that I see in one of the paintings. So I have a wall full of paintings that I'm working on, and that it faces me when I walk in. And then I have some other walls with paintings that are just pretty much done, and those are up as well.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's and I just stay in there and until I feel like, I'm done. So for a few, till the end of the afternoon, and then I might go for a walk or something after that.
Mm, I love this. So, can you tell us? It sounds like you work on more than one painting at a time. Do you kind of bounce between a few, or can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I really do work on several paintings at once.
Mhm.
And there be a time when I'm just working on one. A lot of times when I'm starting a new big painting, I will be with that painting only for the first, maybe a couple weeks or week, depending on how much I can get in there. If it's every day, and, for long days, I can be in there working on that one painting for a week or two. Sometimes also for a small painting that is a perceptual painting, because I work from memory and I work from life. And if I'm working from life, and I start a small painting, um, I tend to kind of stay on that painting, stay very focused on that painting, and then and not leave it till I finished it. Whereas but if I need a break from it, then I have these other paintings that I can, go back into. When I pick a painting that I'm going to go back into, and there's a lot of them, and I have paintings turned against the wall too that I might turn around and realize that I know what I think I know what I can do. Um, but I just I feel like I have a lot of freedom that way when I can um, just enter into to one of these. And I will tend to stay with something, like if I do work on one painting, after working on a few, let's say for the day, then I might stay with that one for a few days then. If I feel like a real connection, that I know where it's going to go. So sometimes it's just like testing grounds that, these paintings are, and, I'm just kind of experimenting with them. And yeah, and then sometimes I feel like I know what I'm doing, and I go in and I just work on that. But that doesn't, at the end of the day, it might look good, but the next morning it doesn't. So you know how it is. But you know what I like to do? I like to take a picture at the end of the painting, and then in the morning, when I wake up, I know you're not supposed to look at your cell phone. I try not to, but I will look at the painting, and then sometimes we'll see something when it's flattened in an image like that. And I really like that. I really enjoy that because it's like a very fluid, you know, like thinking about it. I can take time away from it, come in the house, have dinner. I can go back in, or I usually don't. Take a break. But then in the morning that's the first thing I can think about. And I enjoy that about, process.
It's funny. I remember back in the day an artist talking to me about getting a reducing glass. And now we have like our cell phones so we can like reduce it and look at it at a small scale and see, maybe something with how we're constructing the space, composition. But I always think of the cell phone then as almost this like technical reducing glass of sorts. Um, so I am so curious about this conversation that you have between observation and memory. And I love that you work both ways. And so, I was curious, it sounds like you sometimes just decide, okay, I'm going to work from observation on a smaller piece. When you're working on a piece from memory, do you ever turn to observation while you're working on it? Or what does that process look like for you?
Yeah, so I have all these objects in my studio, and they're objects that I've been working from for a long time. Some of them are newer, and they're around. They're always out, and I look at them, and I'll just kind of look around and see if something might belong in one of my paintings, and then I'll paint from it. Um, and so like there are times when I look at something that's kind of random, and I've just put these things together, and I like also how those might combine to be something. But usually they're like I'm seeing them independent of each other, but then they also have to be able to get along, in the painting together. So um, you know, um, I don't really know until I put them in the painting what their personality, what's going to be revealed, So, but yeah, and the thing about the objects is, that they've been in my life for like all the years that I've been painting, and I've been painting, for over 40 years, and some of the objects are that old, and they have a relationship, to me, and I see them as, as I change as a painter, my objects change as objects, or as they age with me in a way. And I don't really know how to kind of expand on that very much, but I just know that there's a difference between these objects when I first started painting from them, and these objects now. Yeah, so those objects are very important.
I love this idea of these objects that have made their way into your life. And of course, I'm thinking back to what you were saying about your mother and nuance and noticing smaller things like these small moments. So maybe it's how it casts a shadow, um, the shape of it or the color of it. And I think that's really fascinating to think about how the objects that we curate into our life, how they take on a life of their own, like you were saying, or a personality, and that they change as we do the way that we're seeing them. And I think there's like such a beauty to that. Um, a couple questions I have is first, I'm just curious how long you work on a painting. Like, are they constantly shifting? I mean, it looks like they're pretty worked in a beautiful way. So I'm just curious about that.
Well, I'm working on a painting right now that really has been going on for, like a few years now. But it has been, I will say, it's been against the wall for a couple of those years. So, I'm, you know, I'm not like, is it John Lees who showed at Betty Cunningham, and he would work on these bathtubs for, really 30, 40 years. And I mean, I would go to a show and say, I thought he sold that painting and he didn't sell it. So it goes back to his studio. He reworks it. He puts it back in the next show. I don't do that, but I have taken, I think, as we get older, we kind of, there are some paintings that I have that I'm not happy with. I wouldn't want them to go anywhere out of my studio, and I want to rework them. So and it's not necessarily that I'm reworking them in a way that has to do with what I'm thinking about now, because it's to do with what I was thinking about, and probably what I'm thinking about now, because you can't help that. But yeah, so some paintings I've worked on for a really long time, and other paintings, not long, like a couple of weeks. Even a small painting, I could say a couple of weeks. Yeah.
I love that.
Mhm.
You mentioned when you were talking about these objects that have, been in your studio and in your life, combining them. And I think that's something I'm really interested as well in your work is in some of them, like I'm looking at this one grouping that's a recent painting from 2025, and how they combine or are grouped to become almost like a figure of form in itself. And there's this stacking. And then in other ones, there's like this, you know, not some of them are isolated and they move across a tabletop in a way where there might be a certain touch, very deliberate touch in one area, and then where it's completely isolated and like the value of it is so similar it almost becomes part of the table. So could you talk a little bit about these ideas in your work, like these groupings that stack and make forms, and then like this idea of kind of isolating objects?
Yeah, the groupings, um, they're coming, that painting I think you're looking at from this year is a painting that came out of a group, a series of box paintings that I did. I had this black box and I would put objects in it, and then I would paint them, or I would put the objects in, and then the black box would kind of cover them, or the black box would come into the painting, which I've done, for a long time now. But I kind of brought the black box back in, to my paintings now. But have done this in the past, where it kind of cancels out the objects, it erases them or something. It contains them, it kind of contracts. And so I like this relationship between this black box that uh, can contract and contain, and then the openness of the objects when they are out of it, and yet they're grouped together because they're kind of contained in some way by this box, but then they also have this kind of ability to, you know, to open. And um, so that painting doesn't have the black box in it, but there's a black vase that I've painted for a long time. It has been at least 40 years. And that is kind of like, it has a lead role in that painting, and that it's kind of organizing the group, and in another painting it might be isolated, um, and it kind of traveling, through the landscape, because I think of um my paintings sometimes as a landscape, or I'll think of them as a still life, and I love the intimacy of that and the intimacy of the objects close together. But I also love the intimacy of the relationship of the object to the world that they're in, which a lot of times is the tabletop. And the tabletop is sometimes like a garden or a landscape to me, but it also represents the painting itself. So it's like this flat canvas that I put the table on, and the table and the canvas are the same thing. And then it allows me to kind of emerge the objects out of it. So I kind of think about that when I'm pulling the objects out in an isolated way, but or not, or as a group. But the isolated objects, I think it's kind of like portraits in a way. It's like I really want to talk about the objects by themselves, but then how do they relate as a group? And I mean, if I just look at one painting, where I have maybe 5 or 10 objects isolated, I could probably make, you know, um, 30 paintings with just those same objects and just move them around in different ways. So I mean, I like that they can be isolated, and I like that they can be grouped. And
Mhm.
I like what happens when I group them, because it brings out another way of painting for me.
Mm. I absolutely love your tabletops. Like I get lost in them. The paint handling of it, how you're able to stay, in this kind of tighter world of value, but there's so many shifts in color, which can be hard to do. I find them fascinating. And then there's almost like what I find interesting is as the viewer, I start to become like, I love the objects and I'm looking at the objects, but I start to become almost lost in what is the tabletop, you know, in
Yeah.
this gorgeous way. Um, and I start to almost see these, not just the shadows, but the reference of what may have been there before in an object that was moved on the tabletop and in the painting, kind of reinforcing this idea of what you're saying as, the canvas and the tabletop being the same thing. And I'm really drawn to that in your work. And I wanted to talk a little bit about like your color palette too, because I'm really drawn to how you're able to have these kind of pops of color. I hate to call them contemporary color. I had this whole conversation this summer about that, but there is like almost this pop, and it's against um not I don't want to say neutrals or grays, but this world that holds together, but it's such a color world too. I hope I'm explaining that clearly. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Um, yeah, I mean, I pretty much use the color that the object is, so the local color. Um, but sometimes I haven't done that, or I change it. Um, yeah, so I can't really take credit for the color. I feel like it's really my objects.
Mhm.
Um, I test out color sometimes, and sometimes, it works. Like I think I'm trying to be a little bit more experimental with testing color out, like in terms of like um, the the nest that the objects are in, kind of the world that they're in, and sometimes it works out, and I really like, putting like a green down, like a lime green kind of green, and then trying to work like how is that going to work, and then I put my objects in there, and it may or may not work. So I'm kind of testing out color in that way, and I just started a painting that didn't work at all, that was another color, and I really was excited about it, and then I just I couldn't get it. I just couldn't like it. I couldn't work on it. I mean, I tried to, but I think it was also something very literal happening in it that I didn't like. And so I had to completely change it, which is fine. And I might try it again. I don't know that that was the color's fault. I think it was the literal part.
Mhm. Can you also talk a little bit about the role of the figure in your painting? So I'm like looking at this beautiful piece behind you, and I of course keep looking at it with that reclining side laying figure. And in some of your work, you'll occasionally have that reference, or like I'm looking at a piece where there's a hand going in. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Uh, that piece, I think is the chosen object. So I did want to put myself or a figure in the paintings a few years ago, or many years ago, actually. And I used my silhouette to do that to start. And the painting behind me is one of those silhouettes. It's me sleeping with my still life. And and then it kind of turned into a shadow. So I was using my shadow, and that was very fun to do because it was making the objects, changing, how I would see the objects. Or of course this is all made up, and from memory, but just kind of made up shadows. I'm not using a real shadow. So I just imagine how that would work, something passing through a shadow kind of thing, and then try to, make it my shadow. And I have a painting called Shadow Painting, and it is a shadow painting, but it's also the shadow is painting on the painting, and I like that it could do that, like it could be the painter. Um, and so the chosen object is kind of around that too. It's the painter choosing an object, even though I did hire a model and use her arm to paint from. It is my arm, to me. And I could, if I had a model that I paint from, it's not going to be someone else. It's going to be me, or some extension of me. Um, so yeah, so I have a couple of paintings where I have an arm in choosing an object, because that's something that happens, that's very important, and it seems very like fitting to me that I would be, I want to talk about, like, I do choose objects, and there is a process. It's like different for every painting, but it's an important part of my process. And then the shadow, I'm making a painting right now with my shadow in it. It's not so much, and that's something I'll probably continue to do, or in some way, use it myself. And I have used like the back of my head or my profile. It's not really mine, but it's um supposed to be me. A statue. I have a statue that I use that is me in the painting, because I want to be with my objects. I am with my objects. I think about them all the time. I wake up thinking about them. Um, they're just part of my life, I guess. So I want to be with them in my paintings sometimes, and sometimes I don't. I just want to be. It's just the objects.
Mm. I love this idea of like waking up thinking of the objects because they're part of like almost a vocabulary that expresses something much bigger, in your work. I love in this piece too with the hand. I just keep looking at this, the bracelet and how it kind of flattens and then also kind of wraps around the arm. And you do that so well in your paintings where there's always like this duality happening. I feel like, you can read it pushed up, you can push it back. And so the viewer can really begin to play and be in that space in a really activated way, which I think it keeps just drawing me back in, and I just see more and more. Um, so when you've had this wonderful painting career and are continuing to explore these objects and explore painting, and you're also, you teach, And so I was wondering if you have anything that you've learned along your path or that you share with your students that you could share with all the artists who are listening, something maybe that has helped you or you found that has helped students.
Yeah, I think, risk taking is very hard to do, and I'm telling my young students to take risks, and I think that, they can do that, and they're in a safe space where they can take risks and have some help to get them out, of trouble. Um, and as we get older, we might think that, we don't have to take risks, or no one's there to help us. But I do still believe that, it's the way that we learn and grow. And if we don't have problems, um, well, we need to have problems, because if we have a problem, how I solve that problem is different from how someone else solves that problem. And the way that I solve that problem is the beginning of the development of something. And then there's another problem, and then I go down another path that takes me further, and I'm solving that problem my own way. And I think that is a huge important part of being an artist, is finding problems. And sometimes, as a teacher, you can throw problems in front of the students. They have to deal with it, but for yourself, you don't have to do that. You can just keep working. But I like to try to throw problems into my work, or upsets, something radical that doesn't belong there. And deal with it, and I think that's really how we become who we are as artists, if we kind of continue to challenge ourselves in a way, and not just kind of ride on something we know how to do. Which for me would, I mean, it might work well for someone else, because that's just what they're obsessed with. For me, I would be bored. uh I have to have something kind of to work on it. At the same time, once I get a painting to a point, I might not want to throw a problem in. I want to try to, the problem is, how do I finish it or develop it to where I want it to be, which is always the biggest mystery.
Isn't it right? Like, when is this done? When have we rounded it into the completion point, or is it ever complete, right? That is the mystery. Well, Gwen, this has been such a delight. Thank you so much for being on here to talk about your work. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Erica. I appreciate it. Again, it's an honor to be here with you, and thank you.
Thank you. And before we jump off here, can you just share with our listeners where people can find you online to see more of your work?
So, gwenstrahle.com is my website, and at Gwen Paints is my Instagram account.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you, Gwen, and have a great day.
Thank you, Erica.